How's it, guys? Welcome here. This is Wednesday night. It's an unusual one for us. We normally only go live once a week on a Monday. Having said that, it's our fourth one. So we've been really enjoying the sessions and the feedback we've been getting from guys. There's some been really good questions. We've answered as many as we can. Tonight we're going to answer one that's come up a couple of times, which has been on system design. And I spoke on Monday night a little bit about the workflow and the concept planning around the voice project that we did, season 3, most recently. So I chatted to Adrian van der Walt to come in and share his insights on system design specifically, and the two of us will just bounce some stuff for each other every now and again. I'm going to bring him in somewhere right now. I'm not going to talk too long. There you can see him. You can see me. How's it, Adrian?
Hello, everyone. Good evening from a nice, quiet northern suburbs. Thanks for having us, having me, and almost like a continuation of our chat from a couple of months ago.
Yeah, from MediaTek. Yeah, me and Adrian did a chat at the black box at MediaTek. We had a very fancy title, which basically just meant we can talk about anything we wanted to. We called it "What Communication Protocols in the Live Sound Environment" or something like that. And we took it from a perspective, when we used the word communication, it was all the way from starting concept, client communication, crew communication, technician communication, technical communication between gear. Obviously, with the production of that size, there's so many different elements to keep in mind. So it was quite interesting to use that theme and bring context into it, and how we carried it across all the different aspects of the production. And obviously, just to get to the point sooner rather than later, one of the aspects obviously was a big part was the system design. So I've asked Adrian to come in, and I'm going to let him take over from here for a while. He's got his own strategy to how to explain it, but I think what we're going to encourage you guys is keep going with questions. We're watching the WhatsApp. WhatsApp. I'm watching WhatsApp because Johan's watching the Facebook stream for questions that are going to come in. We're going to try and catch up with them as many as we can. If they're in context for what we're doing tonight, we're going to try and grab them at the end of this. Otherwise, I'll find a time to answer them. Adrian answer them as well if it was for him. But we love your feedback, so keep doing that. Keep liking our page so we can get that going. I'm going to switch over to this view now, which is Adrian. And now it's all yours.
Okay. So to tie in with what Cristo said is, I want to talk about system designs in general, the design for the voice itself, and how I actually got to the last design, which was in L-Acoustics L-ISA technology, quite a new thing. I'm not going to talk too much about what L-ISA is about in the workings, because L-Acoustics is doing their own thing this week about L-ISA, which you guys can check up on the YouTube channel at some point. But just a brief background about how I got to my ideas and thoughts about system designs. My background is really from a studio point of view in my early days. And then from there, I started working in theater, and then moved over a couple of years after that as a freelancer in the late 90s, working for Gearhouse. And a lot of these big outdoor, indoor and outdoor events, I started realizing that, it's cool to work on big PAs, but there are certain limitations in a normal stereo setup. And it ranged from outdoor stages where Alanis Morissette performed at the Shark Tank on a beer field, so that was completely open field. And I don't know who remembers the Electric Workshop, and also the Park Station, where we used to do countless raves, and Faithless played, and masses of people on these big PA systems. And, slowly but surely, I started identifying things that I didn't like in the way sound systems behaved. So, and it ranges from outdoor events at West Street tennis courts in Durban, where Counting Crows performed. Kirk Franklin, I think, performed at Loftus Versfeld many moons ago. So I started realizing that a mantra that one of my mentors taught me early on is, like he said, live sound is like a series of compromises, and you have to decide and almost be wise about which ones are you willing to live with and which ones you want to try and change. And then, at some point, people said, so why don't we start doing surround sound for live? And that sounded like a cool idea, but then there's a reason why people don't do it, because back then it didn't work. It was only, if you scale up a 5.1 surround sound system at home and you scale that up to a large audience of 5,000-6,000 people, that hotspot of where the surround sound immersion experience really works is very small in comparison to the larger crowd. So I want to come back to stereo sound systems and the things that I started picking up that we are fighting with as live engineers. So what's important is we have to make a distinction between what stereo is really and what we work with when we approach and stand behind a mixing console. Now, true stereo is basically where a field recording has been done with an array of microphones that records things as we hear it with our two ears in nature. Now, our ability to locate sounds from the left to the right depends on a couple of things. One of them is the time arrival. From if something approaches you from the left, it's going to hit your ear, your left ear first, and slightly later your right ear. So the brain then starts decoding that information, and it's like, okay, it must be from there. There's also a level difference because this ear is closer to the source, this one's away, and there's also the masking of the face. So the clever guys then started building microphone arrays like left-right arrays, MS stereo. So that's true stereo. Now, when you stand behind a mixing console and you start turning a pan pot, that's not true stereo. What happens is, if you want to pan something to the left, all that happens between PA left and PA right, house left and right, is the level increases to the side where you've panned to and decreases on the other side. There's nothing to do with delay difference or masking or anything. So I'd encourage you to do some self-study and figure out, read up on the difference between true stereo and false stereo. Which is basically what happens when you turn on a pan pot. Okay, so now that we know that, we also then need to look at sound system, big sound system. I'm talking 500-600 people, 1,000 people, and beyond that. So whether it's indoors or outdoors. Now I'm going to switch to, if you just bear with me, I quickly need to switch to a share screen. And I would like to start sharing this. Cristo, you can see that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So this is the typical approach. We usually go out and deploy a stereo left-right system. So as you can see here, house left, a big PA hanging in there, house right, another PA there. So that's a front view. And on the right, we see house left PA and house right. Now, when we look at this legend on the right, it gives you an idea of where people have a good experience, a good spatial experience between left and right. Now, this is based loosely on two fundamental issues. It's the level difference between house left PA and house right PA. So there's a level difference the more you move over to the left or to the right. You can imagine if you would stand over here in the crowd, this side of the PA is going to be louder than that side. So that's the one fundamental. The second fundamental, which is almost more important, more of a challenge in big systems, is the left-hand side PA is going to arrive at a shorter time interval than the right-hand PA. So the further you move off to the left, the more out of time the PA left is going to be with PA right. And now, so those of you who are more schooled in system tuning and time alignment and all that will know how critical it is to have elements of the PA in perfect time. So now this brings us, to these dark green areas on the far left and the far right. So these guys are not going to have as good an experience as this triangle of light green in the middle. So basically center line where there's a slight deviation between left and right in terms of levels, but also in time arrival. So this triangle is going to have a good experience, which is great. So, that made me think about what can I do to make things a bit better for the audiences that I mix for? And I then stumbled on a theory about if you want to have a great sounding sound system, it almost has to be infinitely small, where the low frequency drivers, the mids, the highs, everything is in such a small space that it radiates out to the whole audience at the same time. It's in phase, in time, and it sounds perfect because it's coherent. So you can think about the application of a coaxial transducer where the high frequency driver sits within the low end. So that's one of those design theories. So basically I've explained now the issue here about where people are going to have a great listening experience, where there's good, strong stereo imaging between left and right. Say if you've got keyboards that sit on the left-hand side and you want to pan keys left, and you've got a guitarist on the right-hand side and you want to pan him right. So the issue that's going to arise for the people on the left, apart from the fact that the left-hand side PA is louder and is going to arrive first, the people on this side here is going to hear, they will hear the keyboard that is panned to the left-hand side. But what they're not going to hear is the guitars that are panned to this side of the audience. So now it's a threefold issue that we run into in large, venues. So by default, then people started rethinking their mix methodologies and almost said, well, for all the critical things like the voice, like the kick drum, like the snare drum, or whatever else you'd deem important, you're not going to pan hard left or hard right or in that stereo wide image. You're going to put everything down the center. So essentially we started mixing in like a dual mono vibe where you've got it looks like a stereo PA, which works fine in your living room, works fine in cinemas and all that. But when we go beyond that, as I said, these three things become a bit of a challenge for us. So so let's go to a different venue. For some of you might recognize it as the Dome, Northgate Dome. End of 2014, we got a brief for a couple of thousand people seated. You'll see here, these are all, this quadrant here is flat seating, and then raked seating at the back. So the initial approach would have been house left, house right, outfall left, outfall right. But then I started thinking, and I thought, well, you know, now knowing this time arrival issue, the level issue, the panning issue with this false panning machine that's on the console that's almost not useful for me anymore, what can I do as a system designer to change things, to make the audience's experience a bit better? So then I changed the approach to, there we go. So that's the same show, but then what I did is, instead of having a left PA and a right PA, I almost did like a left center right, and everything ran in mono, no stereo panning whatsoever. And then I had 3 delays down the room. So immediately I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. The time arrival difference between PA left and PA right is now gone, because for the people that sat over here, the time arrival difference now wasn't such a big issue because there was a center hang. So the idea with this was that I wanted to make that massive big PA and almost take it to a center cluster. So I just took pan and chuck it out of my mix, because I didn't see any point of trying to achieve something that I know is not going to work. And I kept on using this approach over the years, and most of the next 2 slides also the dome applications, and you'll see that it starts in the center of the stage, and then it fans out, and sometimes I put in delays, sometimes not. And this approach started working pretty well. And there's another one, similar type of application, but with 4 delays, because the seating arrangement on the extremities were a bit of a challenge. So then came 2017, and we had to take the voice, which is now the golden thread that I'm coming back to. And I thought, well, looking at the venue, which is Mosaic on 14th Avenue, it fans out, so it suits my idea of a centralized PA. It suits it perfectly. And also, my design philosophy for the voice is that the voice comes first. The talent stands in the middle of the stage, they sing with a band behind them, music, voice. So the design of the PA, that centralized PA, fell completely hand in hand with my idea of, you know, keeping the voice, keeping the attention where the talent is standing. So, you know, that's all great. And we then did the second season, was it? I think it was the second season of The Voice Lives at Mosaic in that configuration, which looked like that. Those of you familiar with the venue. So the stages on this end basically got a left hang, a center hang, a right hang, and then a low end configuration, everything flown in the air, which then radiates out. Everything's monorized. There's no left-right panning, no spatialization, but it means that people who sat there, people who sat there, people who sat at the back got pretty much the same mix in terms of tonality, in terms of level, so that all 3,000 people could have the same experience. And that was my design idea behind it. Then we fast forward a couple of years, end of 2018, when we started the Blinds and Battles season for a part of season 3 for The Voice. And we were at Urban Brew, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Um, I then got whiff that L-ISA might become available. So now I had this challenge of bringing in this brand new technology that no one's ever tested locally, no one's ever heard locally. But now this is where the communication part comes in, about having to go to the end client and say, look, we want to try something new, but we've never heard it. So we want to take a calculated risk. So what ensued in those 5 months or so was a lot of communication, because I was in talks with the people back in France. We went through different iterations of the design. We ended up on version 13, my lucky number. And even that had to be retweaked when we hit the venue and started setting up. But basically, what I want to get to is that over the course from, let's say, 2014 or so, when I started doing my big systems as centralized clusters, I did away with that issue of level differences, delay differences, and then the false spanning. But now I had to really get out of my comfort zone and punt something that is brand new. It's proven, tested, it's toured in the rest of the world. But luckily, the people that I work for, multimedia, the management is incredible. Once I won them over, they were in full support of what I wanted to do. So through a series of meetings, which Cristo was also part of, we sat with the end client and we explained to them, this is new. We want to push the envelope of what we want to do. Now, all of this is fine and well if you want to just talk about it, but you have to somehow substantiate your ideas with facts. So the great thing was that the design software really came into play here. And so I want to do a quick ramp up to how we got to switch from this monocluster design to L-ISA. So I'm going to quickly take a step back to the stereo design. The design you see here is of Ennio Morricone in Italy a good couple of years ago. And this would have been the stock standard design for, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 people in the venue. House left, on left, house right, and then outfalls to the extremities, because they even play, I think it's at like a 270 degree, where they almost play in the round, people up the rafters on the house right side, as well as on the house left. Now, for about, I would say about 20 to 25% more amplification power, you can get more resolution in a L-ISA-based, object-based mixing. So where the traditional PA designs look like this, an L-ISA object-based mixing PA design looks like that. So a whole lot of speakers pointing in the same direction. You think, oh my goodness, this is phasing hell. It's going to sound terrible. But the catch with this system design is that each of these hangs gets a discrete signal that's been processed through a processor that connects to the mixing console. So at no point will the signal that comes out of the very first hang, out of the second hang, or the third hang, you won't ever get the exact same audio signal coming out of each of those hangs. So the end result for the audience is, if I choose to pan something far left, let's say there's a guitar solo and the guitarist stood right there, it sounds like the sound of the guitar comes from where he is. With this kind of technology, you can narrow the sound down to such a exact position. It's almost surreal. It's eerie to grab that pan pot and move it as you see that person walk the front of the stage, or even depth. So anyway, I now explained to our end client, we want to try something new like this. I also had to explain to my management that we're going to have to spend a lot of money for us to do this. So there was a whole lot of explanation to do. But the explanation part was backed up by rock solid system designs and facts and figures. So if you remember the first slide that I showed, where that very narrow light green line was, where now all of a sudden within a multi-hang design with L-ISA processor, a whole lot more people get to experience that spatialized experience. That, you know, so when you start moving that guitarist's sound from the left to the right, all the people in the light green seats would have heard it. Whereas before, if you remember, there was a very thin little narrow triangle that ran there, and only people in the center line would have heard any form of proper stereo design. So just by showing a picture like this to the client and to my management, made them think, oh, well, that's a very good idea. But then you can also come back with facts and figures, where in the initial stereo design, only 22% of people would have heard a proper stereo image. Now it actually went up to 74%. So now if you equate that back to ticket sales, and when you start having conversations with the promoter, all of a sudden, you know, the promoter's eyes go ping. They can charge more for more seats, so they can generate a bigger income. So these are all things that kind of led to the motivation being, you know, where people gave it the nod and said, cool, let's do this. So now how does this apply back to the voice, and specifically to Mosaic for season 3? So it looks a little bit like that. This is a viewpoint right in the middle from front of house position, where you'll see there are 5 hangs, hang 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then either side of that is an extension. So just quick terminology so you understand what's happening. These 5 hangs here is what we call a frontal scene, and it's as wide as what the performing stage area is, so that if a guitarist comes to the left, I can pan the guitarist to only come out that very first hang. Now, if I want to extend the image, the field of imagery, what people hear, I could then start placing effects like stereo effects or delays wider than what the actual performing the proscenium is. So that's why extensions exist. So L-ISA basically exists in 3 flavors. There's this frontal scene, which is the fundamental building block of L-ISA. Then you get L-ISA 360, where you can then place speakers all the way around you, and if you've got enough money, all the way around you in 360 degrees around you. So that's the second flavor. The third flavor is the 360 around you, plus elevation speakers up above into the roof. So those are the 3 flavors of affordability, let's call it that. We started out with this frontal scene, and you know, so it gave us so much resolution in terms of where I could place objects. And you know, when you start mixing in L-ISA technology, it's an object-based mixing style where when you grab the pan pot, you grab a very narrow sounding source and you can place it with high accuracy wherever you want. So that's the first tool within the L-ISA toolbox, if we can call it that. Then you've got, if you find that that guitarist, let's come back to him, sounds too narrow, you can then add width to the processor. So you can take that guitar sound and make it a bit wider. So if you've got maybe a vocal ensemble, 4 people stood on the house right side and they sound too small, too thin, you can just take each of those 4 objects and add width. So they sound bigger than what they are. So then you almost approach, you go back to what our ears are used to in a stereo system. If you stood right in the center and you turn the pot left and right, you kind of got that wide image doing this. So that's width, which is the second thing, second tool. Then third one is depth. So in that stage, you can come down stage with the sound of that specific object, or you can turn the knob, the depth knob, and move that sound further back. Now it does 2 things. It introduces a high shelf, so it starts to sound like it's further away. It drops in level, but it also introduces a room engine. So you get like an added effect, like it goes back into a bigger room than what you're kind of mixing in. So those are the 3 basics of mixing in L-ISA. But I don't want to get into much detail there. I just want to, touch on some of the high points. If you want to read up about it, then go back to their site and check it out. This whole week they're talking about L-ISA. It's very cool. Now, to come back to the facts and figures that I had to present to people on my side and to the end client, there's a top view of the venue. Now, this particular venue poses 2 fairly big challenges. You see where the laser pointer is hanging now. This light gray area is a bulkhead. Back when the room was designed, it was designed with a center cluster. That center cluster resided in this bulkhead. So it was a center cluster of speakers that played out, fanned out to all the seats as the room is designed. So the focal point where the pastor stood, that's where the sound comes from. So, there's some merit in that design philosophy. But they've since gone away from that sound system, but the bulkhead is still there. So that was one of the design challenges we were faced with in this particular room. So which meant that the frontal scene that we saw here, this frontal scene on the top view, wasn't hanging above the proscenium or just in front of the proscenium. It was about 7 meters forward, downstage into the audience. Now, obviously, what that means is that this big green coverage area also moved forward into the venue by about 7 meters. And so you can actually look, when you look at the figures, we had a shared area of just short of 68%, which isn't too bad. I think if we could come back about 7 meters and hang just in front of the proscenium without that bulkhead being there, this probably would have gone up to the low 70s, mid 70s. And then obviously the venue's also got a catwalk which masks the sound for that top 4 or 5 rows. So, and that's why the figures on here aren't that great, but it was enough for us to motivate why we wanted to go with L-ISA. And, it wasn't just an idea of where I said, guys, I want to try something new and it's going to cost you a couple of million rand. So I had something to fall back onto. And that pretty much sums up what I wanted to talk about, just to give you an idea of why it is so important for us to communicate our intentions with people in the production field, in the production team, with each other, because a system design change obviously would have meant a different outcome for Cristo, a different outcome for everyone involved. But being able to present your design ideas to all the parties made it easier for them to understand why I wanted to do this particular design. So I think I'm going to call it here, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Oh, there's your pretty face.
Hey, yeah, well, pretty old face.
While you were talking, I was coming up with like a gazillion questions just to rack your brain, because I think the complexity of what you explained in the growth of your outcome expectations over the years. First question, and this is not more. It's again on the communication. So it's client management, which is something that came up in one of our sessions a couple of evenings ago. Is on your the designs that you showed for the dome. Firstly, were those corporate functions, music functions?
Music.
Corporates will have music in them, but it's not a concert.
Oh no, so it's not concert, but it was every single one of them. I'm looking at the 3 different shows had top line local artists.
Okay.
Someone like either Mafiki Zolo or 2 or 3 different bands, Mikasa, so it's.
So music still played a big role in the production. So how then did you communicate, or seeing that if you're taking a mono approach and they've got a producer or an engineer that comes with, how do they respond to your design choice?
Well, so it was always a bit of a gamble, because the moment you know who the band is, then you reach out to the engineer or production or management and say, well, we need a current tech writer, which is going to be like about 60% accurate. But then you start the conversation. And I just learned quickly that, because this is such a way out idea of no more stereo for you, sorry, buddy, you're going to now mix in mono. But here are the wins. No more left-right level issues, delay issues. You're going to get better clarity to more.
So you would get the client/management on your side quickly, but the engineers would be the ones that are digging heels in or trying to tell you how wrong it is. This is music. We have to have stereo. How's my reverb going to work? Da, 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 da.
And don't get me wrong, I did get a lot of pushback from especially the engineers side, and also from some of the more creative management side, where they felt that, as you say, the sound system couldn't do the music any good. So I said to them, fine, I take it, but let's talk after the gig.
Yeah,
and
let's experience it.
The proof was in the pudding. You could look around you, the crowd enjoyed it. It's not like people stood there and didn't enjoy it, because for them, the trade-off between losing the left-right imaging, which is really on stuff like keys and effects and the frilly beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
But that's still translating in mono mix.
But in a way, your inherent knowledge or your skill in using a reverb in that mono context with pre-delays and depth and all that even gets tested, because then you need to understand that concept better.
Yes.
It's not a preset open up fader, default, and it's already separated from the vocal. You have to go and separate it. So exactly. I get that. That's a lot of discussion. I think there's an interesting one there for guys to just be open-minded. I mean, I often say when people listen to other people mixing in a room, out of 100 people that's in the room, 80 to 85% of the people are there, believe it or not to criticize you. So as long as you can as long as you don't make a mistake, they don't even know you exist, which is that's prize number one. Yeah. 10% of them go in there, they got audio systems at home and they can appreciate what's coming out. A very small percentage of people take a technical approach and they'll start criticizing, and you could have done this, often from a very negative perspective, which means they don't give it a chance. They don't listen first. They want to talk first. They walk in before they've even heard the PA. They look at it and go, oh, this is going to be horrible.
Yeah.
I don't have time for you. Anyway, so I think we're very similar in that kind of output. And I appreciate that, because often, when you do set up a system and you have guest engineers, or, if you're babysitting in front of a house where you've done the system design, it's quite a handful, especially with internationals, to deal with their expectation, and all that kind of stuff. So communicating becomes key. And I think you covered that in the sense of you start preempting some of that communication because you understand and you've had the experience.
Look, okay, I have to admit, I've never been in that position where I could engage with an international artist or talent and say, come try this approach. When we did those type of shows, it was already pre-designed by someone else, and you just hung boxes where someone else thought it was good. But whenever I have the say or then I'd like to approach it from that side if I'm not mixing on L-ISA.
Yeah.
And often I would do a hybrid between a left-right big system and this centralized radiating out.
Yeah. But the thing is, for me, the objective and if you're reading to what is the motivation behind it, it is the audience member. And if you think about, we're trying to communicate what's happening to everybody in the room as fairly as possible. You know, so whether it is a stereo system or a L-ISA system or a mono system, that has to be your ultimate objective, And I think if you can achieve that, whether it, you were dealing with, 5,000 up gigs, but even in a 200-seater, if you're in a 200-seater, one speaker in one corner might be loud enough, but is it doing the event justice? Because now you're taking your single source radiating from one space, but, it's an Eon on a stick or something like that. Yeah. It's not going to work. You have to try and distribute, and there's other methodologies that come into it so that you can maintain that same outcome base, So I think that conversation and the ability to have an educated insight into that is key. Yeah. Because there's nothing worse than when a guy does something or shows you a cool trick and you don't agree with it, or you think, well, that's cool. And then they take offense because you're supposed to think he's like, whoa, Yeah. Everybody's welcome to their opinion, but it has to be in context. Exactly. It has to be in context. I think that's the end of it. My other question I had for you, just on a personal level, the technology it's not plug and play. I mean, I've seen L-ISA. I don't know it as well as you've done the training and all that, but I stuck my head in there and I looked at the technical, asked you a lot of questions about how the routing works, what the signal flow is and all that, how it interfaces with your console, how did you control the imaging, snapshots. I mean, we had a lot of conversations technically because that's what I want to get my head around. Yeah. And then instead of asking, I observed your interaction with the mixer, because that was a new experience for you as well. Because a fader now, every component has a PA behind it. If you want to say it in English, because you have those discrete parts. Exactly. And every element, instead of sending a left-right bus, and I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. And I mean, I'm hoping we did put the link to the L-Acoustics into the Facebook page, so guys can scroll back and go link on that. But every 100, we ended up on 112, I think, channels. Yeah, with EVSs and all that.
Yeah, 112, yes.
Yeah, somewhere there. Yeah. And how many of those were discrete paths into the L-ISA processor?
Sure. My math isn't that good. I would guess about 80% of it. The L-ISA processor accepts 96 inputs, discrete inputs, so that could be 96 objects. So basically what it is, it's a direct out post-fade mix of kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom. So if you guys go back to the spreadsheet that Cristo spoke about, was it on last week?
On Monday,
On Monday.
Yes.
Then you'll see the channelist breakdown. And most elements of the band, whether it was a rim shot or a hi-hat or a track left or a track right, each of those elements were single objects within the L-ISA ecosystem, if we can call it that. So each of those 96 inputs you would then have to approach and make a decision as to A, relative level, B, where you want to place that narrow object, C, do I want to make it a bit wider, D, do I want to place it a bit further into the field and introduce the room engine, times 96. So your
preparation,
the preparation, but also the mindset. I had to really rewire my head within those first couple of weeks, because I would instinctually go back to my old way of mixing.
Yeah, it's muscle memory.
I wanted to reach out and do things, but then, you know, kind of have to resort back to the training, and it's like, stop, listen, think, and then do.
So how many times did you reset in 12 weeks?
A couple of times.
Yeah. No, I think,
so it's a completely different mixing approach that you have to take.
I think the guys that are watching this that are technically inclined, I mean, it's very well worth sticking your head in a couple of the online tutorials on L-ISA's, on L-Acoustics website, and seeing the technology behind this. Because if you heard what Adrian just said in terms of the object-based mixing, you know, we weren't sending out the outputs of the console. We were sending out individual channels via MIDI discrete soft patching into a processor that gets that knowledge, looks at the three-dimensional image that you want to create, then applies that to your system design in the room to get your spatial your spatial imaging out. So you could take your file, and your L-ISA system can grow or go smaller, and you can still use that mix.
You can scale it up and scale it down.
Correct.
So if you're touring and you go from a club gig to a 2,000-seater, all you do is you do the sound vision design of each venue.
But you don't have to change your show file.
No, the show file stays.
I mean, you'll adapt to any venue, but yeah. And I think that's key.
And that's the beauty of how these softwares, the different softwares in this bouquet of L-Acoustics, how they integrate now. You can send information to and fro. It makes that transfer of scaling up and scaling down almost seamless. It saves a lot of time. So I see two questions. One is from Michael Isaacs in Cape Town.
Yes.
How's Michael? About, and if I understand this correct, about the effect of the room engine and how it works, basically. So if we go to the second flavor of L-ISA, where we've got the frontal scene above the stage, plus speakers all the way around us, 360. Basically, what we can do is, if we take one of those objects, and it will have to be an abstract object, like, let's say it's a theater of the mind, and in this theater of the mind, one of the objects is a triangle that goes ping in the back of the room. The reverb, the room engine reverb for that triangle or that specific sound would generate from where it is. So each object creates its own effect that plays back into the room, and early reflections and late reflections. So the processor is, I don't know what happens in there, but it's a
doing
massive
a lot.
process.
Even with your front design, your front level design that you've got, you had the ability of bringing to a certain point. If one of the guitarists, for example, went and stood, which they did, behind the judge or the coaches,
yes,
you could have people in the room when he starts playing literally look towards him.
Yes,
you know, the PA is all there, but it's using phasing, it's using the room reverbs and all that to create the illusion of a sound source, you know, projected off on almost like a hologram from an audio perspective. And I imagine that when you have a 360 system, that much more effective that can get. Yeah,
now, look, there's certain criteria and parameters that make it or break it. So that very last slide that I showed with the mapping quality, it's got like certain criteria, and it's to do with the way we perceive location of a sound, and that's within like 7 degrees of width, and I don't know if it's 15 degrees.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just a point. The green and the yellow areas. The yellow areas are not compromised orally. You still have a full coverage. The element that is, for the lack of a better word, missing is the spatial awareness.
Exactly.
You still have the full mix.
Do you want me to go back to that slide?
Yeah, just show that quickly. That last one that showed you the layout, because you don't want to, if you don't explain it well, then people can think.
Okay, so back to this one. So if I quickly switch on my laser pointer.
Yeah, so just explain what is yellow bad, or what is yellow and what is green? Because I mean, you focused a lot on the green being the good zone,
yes.
And someone could read it wrong.
Okay, so on these mapping results, if we look on the right-hand side, it means every single seat in the room is gonna get coverage. On the left, the differentiator there is the green seats. All these guys will get the spatialized experience of the full spatialized experience of panning, width, depth, if you have elevation, all that. But now the unshared, if you see here, the unshared percentage of 32, the seats off to the side and off to that side. All it means is these guys here gets the old school monorized feed. So they no far off worse than the previous season. They're getting exactly what they got 2 years ago. But 2 years ago, 100% of the seats got a mono mix. Now, 2 years later, almost 68% of the seats got a spatialized experience, which, if this was an event that relies heavily on ticket sales, the promoter would be your best friend, because so on the left hand side you'll see the legend of the shared and aligned coverage area, and then you see a darker green patch of where they get the spatialized imaging, but in terms of time arrival, it's not great. And you'll see there's maybe 4 or 5 seats over here, and the same on that side. And again, the main reason for that was the fact that we couldn't get the frontal scene where we wanted to hang it because of this bulkhead that protruded 7 meters into the room.
Yeah.
Does that answer?
Yeah, that answers my question, and I think it answers a couple of questions that didn't get asked. I like the other question that came here. I think you're reading the same one from Ben.
From Ben?
Yes.
Besides budget, what are the challenges that keep the L-ISA system from being used more often in SA shows? I don't know if it's a very long list, but
can I ask a question to phrase that? Can I ask a question sort of in line with it? Because I had a question where, and I think it'll help you answer yours, is what is the rollout of our L-ISA system?
Oh, okay. So
so client phones now. It's Wednesday afternoon, guys. We just got a gig. It's Friday in SCC.
Yes.
Is it technically
yes.
able to roll it out that quickly?
Yes. It takes more rigging. It takes more speakers, slightly more speakers. So in terms of, like I said earlier on, in terms of amplification, you're looking at about maybe 20-25% more amplification.
Okay, I thought it was more.
So in terms of the budget, it is more expensive, but it's not double the cost. It's like a quarter more than what the client would have paid. So in terms of costing and the technicalities of getting it up in the air, no problem whatsoever. The one challenge, one of the challenges is the way it gets mixed. So someone who wants to mix the show needs to understand the technology, and would need to go on a bit of a crash course to understand what to do and to achieve what they want to achieve. But that's a short, steep learning curve.
Yeah, it's a switch that needs to flick.
Yeah. When I went for training, it was a 3-day training. So Friday, perhaps not if it's a guest engineer. But if it's me mixing, no problem. So in terms of mixing styles, there are 5 different ways of mixing L-ISA. You can either mix on a laptop itself with a touchscreen, if you don't have a mixing console, or you can mix on a console that's got a desk link between the console itself and the processor. At the moment, there are 3 brands. Avid is one brand, Digico, and now of lately also Yamaha Rivage. So those 3 consoles have got software loaded on it called Desk Link that then talks to the processor that helps you place things in terms of where you want to place it.
Yeah, so you get your width and your depth and your panning.
Yeah, exactly. So you can do that on the console, on the familiar work surface that you're used to. But then you can go a bit deeper than that. You can then introduce snapshots within the L-ISA controller so that objects can move in this 3D space. So when I hit a snapshot recall on the L-ISA controller, it will take an object and move it over time from here to there. And if it's a rehearsed show, I can almost get it spot on. So I can either
if they end in the same spot.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm talking about rehearsals, which is a swear word in most South African productions.
Yeah, time.
We don't rehearse shows enough to get them as slick as what it should be. So if the show was going to happen on Friday, then I would say it's going to be tough because, so what you have to understand is there's so many more decisions to be made, not just by myself, but by the creative directors, the stage managers, getting people on and off stage. Lighting. There's a whole lot of other decisions that also have to be made. So,
but let me ask you this then: Would say I had a band that I'm going to tour with, I would be able to come spend an afternoon with you at Multimedia, put a couple of little caras or something up, which will simulate the L-ISA, set up a mix, get a framework working, so that when we go to a venue, it's a very quick adaptation of then you can just mix because your technical structure is in.
Exactly.
So nothing stops.
And that's the beauty of the software, because now you can scale it down to a room that's 10 by 10. You can even take it a step further. You can export the L-ISA design or the Sound Vision design file to Klang. So Klang, for those who don't know, is 3D immersive binaural mixing for headphones, for in-ear mixes. So you can export that file and bring it into the Klang world, where your whole L-ISA design now sits virtually in Klang, but on headphones.
So you can
practice. You can start working on the basics.
Yeah, but you need that template to start working from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's something, and that's what I said earlier. I mean, the more guys get their head around the technical aspect and how it works, it starts answering a lot of questions, because it's like, everybody can drive a car, but you get in a Formula One car, there's a couple of small things that change, There's still an engine, still a gas pedal, still a clutch, still a this, still.
The basics are there.
But it's you that have to change, not the car.
Yes, your approach.
Exactly. Your aggressiveness, your understanding, and the forgiveness of the system decreases. Because
so this is one thing that because when we did The Voice, the third season, I realized that I couldn't just trust my own ears. So I then had to ask other people to come in and listen to rehearsals, listen to midnight mixes where I would play back multi-tracks of the previous 2-3 days and run through the songs one by one. And so various friends in the industry came in and said, no, that doesn't sound like it, or that's too this or too that, or that sounds good, that movement works. So it's also opening up the approach of, that I as the engineer isn't the only one that's right. So I had to quickly chuck that out the window and open myself up to constructive, and sometimes, people had things to say, which I kind of took personal, but,
No, I didn't mean to
it's all
say it
for the
that
better
way.
of the show.
I didn't mean to say it that way. I'm kidding.
Well, you did smile every now and again, so.
Yeah, no, I did. I actually, you didn't see me every time. There was often times in the rehearsals where I had a gap, or I had Eddie in the OB, and I could go sit down, and I walked around to experience it. And I would go sit in a specific spot, different spot every time, and I would watch a performance from beginning to end. And then I could hear how you were adapting from first to second performance. Or I'd come in the next day, having heard it the day before, and then you spent your midnight coffee runs, reworking it, and then I would hear the differences in the placements. And it was, for me, it was interesting because it's such, you don't always get the opportunity to just experience something like that in the context.
Exactly.
A demo, even when we did those workshops later on, you had the band, you had the recordings, but you didn't actually have the band on stage. Having the actual live drum kit on stage, then walking around and experiencing the placement of the mix, that it was definitely an experience to enjoy.
And so back to the context of the show. It's a singing contest, so the talent's voice takes precedence. The music is there to support talent, to showcase who they are and how they sing and how they've progressed through the coachings of the four coaches. So the voice, had to take precedence in all the mixes.
Yeah.
And it was just so easy to make space with the panning and the width and the depth and all that, just to make this beautiful big white scene of sounds that, it's
experience.
The experience for the audience was completely different. So what I wanted to say is different textures, because you can have stuff sounding very narrow and very specific, and then you can mix the textures. And so I would say orally, it was a completely different and much nicer, engaging experience for the audience.
I see a question here from Ace, which I think you answered just now, but just to recap, estimated cost difference between standard and L-ISA.
Yeah, so, one has to also consider stuff like pre-production time. And because, us as a company is still in the early stages with the system, we're still finding our feet of how we incorporate the time versus, what we can charge the client versus the experience of being first in the market. So there's a whole bunch of things in the back, in the mix, that we discuss on a daily basis when we consider L-ISA for a show. But
I think, having said that also is a great opportunity for anybody to approach you guys and say, listen, I've got an event, would love to incorporate this, help, how can we do this? And because it's a learning experience for you, but the product gets out there. I think the more it's like a new console,
Yes.
The more guys that get worked on, that gets the opportunity to work on it, the more it gets requested, the more it gets used, and it grows.
There's always a deal in a deal,
Exactly. There's always a deal in a bag of biltong.
There we go.
Yeah.
A whole lot of coffee.
Yeah, I think.
And also, what I would really encourage people that find this interesting, I'm happy to chat offline and guide and go check this out, go check that out. If there's something
can we throw your email address in the chat line?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I'm on Facebook, so you'll pick me up. GP, sorry.
Yeah.
So asked about the training. L-ISA training only happens in France or in the States. So you physically have to fly there, be bombarded by a whole lot of theory, and spend time in their mixing studios. At this stage, I don't think they're going to open it up yet, because if you look at at the product life cycle of ELISA technology. It's still in the very early stages. It's gone way past the proof of concept. We know it works. It's now where the manufacturer wants to ensure that wherever it gets rolled out, it gets done exactly to their specification, their requirements. So if you go to a show now worldwide where K1s are hanging, doing their thing, no one's going to turn around and say it wasn't a great show because it was the K1 system. So the trust and the public's trust in the brand, in the model K1 exists. People would then say maybe the engineer didn't have a good day or the band didn't have a good day or whatever. But at this stage, they want to be in control of how these ELISA shows get rolled out.
Yeah.
So even though I've been to the training and we own the processor and all that, every single design that I do, I have to run by the people in France. So each of the designs go back to about maybe a seventh or eighth or ninth revision of Skype calls, of screen sharing, of try this, try that, them understanding the requirements for the specific show better. So they want to make sure that every single ELISA deployment is done to the best possible outcome for the audience, because they know that by word of mouth is the way they are where they are.
Okay, I see.
That's very long.
Yeah, we've got a mutual friend of ours, little Bergie, yeah, Bergwijn.
And he's asked.
Yeah, I'm going to leave that one to you.
Okay, so subs. I think it's the thing we all love to talk about. For an ELISA deployment, and I think going forward for most L-Acoustics deployments, whether it is Kiva or whatever it is, the winning prize is to have one central sub configuration, preferably flown in the center above the stage. So it eradicates a whole bunch of things. So it just confirms the design ideas I had from years ago of going to a centralized point. Sub isn't something you want to ban because you want to have all the energy come from one point. Sure, you can do a sub array in front of the stage and arc it out, but that's also not as effective as having a central sub hang in the middle of the stage. The argument then comes in of, yes, but I don't get any ground coupling. I don't get that planing coupling 3 dB effect. But that's fine. The reason behind that is if it hangs freely in the air, the loss of energy further into the field, that drop-off ratio of it sounding softer and softer and softer the further back you go, that ratio is less. It's like a flatter curve.
Because you don't have that boost in the front.
Exactly. You don't have that 3 dB boost or 6 dB boost in front of the stage. That ground plane effect, because that disappears, your loss...
Your perception is
much less.
Over-exaggerated.
So, and I'm sure another question is going to come up in terms of time alignment of all these speakers hanging in the air and all that. Everything gets time aligned to the central hang. So if you've got a scene of 5 speakers or 5 hangs, that center hang is time 0 for everything else.
Yeah.
If your subs hang behind it, then you take that frontal scene, you bring it back to the subs, other way around. All the out fills, the front fills, everything else, by the way, gets the same exact identical signal, all the fills. Everything you saw in that yellow areas to the sides and the sub gets the same feed. and that comes out of the processor. That's mixed in the processor
Yeah.
post whatever you do.
In other words, you don't have a sub, like a post-fade sub feed to the PA, because the PA is now in the processor.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's, everything gets time aligned to a central point.
Yeah. If you don't want low end on it, put a filter on it.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's
I think.
And for the people that do still want to do aux fed sub, the processor accepts an auxiliary input. So if you've got someone that's insistent of doing it,
and then you would just then route that specifically to the subcluster within the processor. So that aux feed goes directly to the subcluster.
Yeah, signal routing for this is paradise. It takes a couple of days to figure things out.
Michael's making a comment about weight limitations and I mean, I think you said it. The ideal situation would be a subcluster center hang middle. The practicality of that in a lot of places doesn't exist.
No, exactly.
Even at that design we did at Mosaic, the reason for the 7 meters, because if you looked at the drawing, you said, well, why was it 7? We could have come back a bit. We had to still fit in truss, lights, subs. I mean, there were so many elements that physically pushed us forward. And even then you had the subs just left and right of the center cluster, if I remember correctly.
I was just behind it.
Yeah.
Just behind it.
So you still pushed forward a little bit more.
So ideally it's better to have that center hang and the subs in close proximity. If you can't, then you're gonna have to then go back to what I said earlier of that mantra of live sound is a series of compromises. You need to decide what you're happy to live with. If weight limitations or height limitations or cost limitations, if it's something beyond your control, make peace with it, and then do the best you can with what you have.
That's Don't just make peace with it and fluff around. You still put the
you
effort
still
in.
You still want to have a job or hopefully have a job in a while from now.
Ben made a comment here. So he's been keeping an eye on 4D sound. It's a long question, but he basically says, so is L-ISA a more practical interpretation of what 4D immersive sound would be for a large crowd?
Yeah, look, L-ISA is a step in the direction of having full surround sound or immersed sound, what they call it nowadays. So the idea of it is to obviously have L-ISA in 360 and elevation speakers above you, so that you basically can encapsulate the whole audience in this field of speakers and immerse them. That's the whole idea, is to immerse them in this technical grid of speakers, and you can then decide where you want to place it. So then it would be much easier to be precise with, surgical precision to place that triangle at the back of the room. Whereas now if you go to cinema, that's a different story. Cinemas are pre-mixed with a Brazilian inputs. Now, let's think about the practicalities of touring a cinema with that big console and having to remix it for every venue.
And that processing.
So L-ISA is a much more practical approach in achieving that same goal of immersing people in that field of sound. And I would really encourage you guys to go to the site and read up more about it. This whole week, a lot of very clever people are going to talk about specifically L-ISA, if that's something that you find interesting.
Okay. I think Jason's commenting or congratulating you on something. So your bosses are listening.
No.
One of them.
Okay.
I think we've covered all the questions. Gary came through. Gary, I'm just going to comment on what you're asking. I think I actually asked that question. You might have just joined us late. So when you get a chance, just rewind a little bit in this in this stream, and you'll see him answer that exact question. He's asking about the approach to mixing between normal and L-ISA from the console's perspective, which we did answer in detail.
Oh, yeah. So Jason is mentioning a private function we did. It was in a marquee, and so now you think L-ISA is only meant for massive deployments. No, it's not. We did L-ISA in a marquee where the top of the PA was trimmed at 4.5 meters.
Sure.
The stage. So the proximity of everything was quite a challenge to make it fit from a visual point of view, where all these guests would still be able to see and enjoy a big band.
What was your percentage of green zone, if I put it like that?
It was in the 70s.
Oh wow!
Was quite higher because it was a marquee that had open sides. So I was able to zone the PA in such a way that there would be a music zone, which was the proper immersive zone, and then outside of that would be where people could hear a vocal microphone when the announcements were made, and also let people escape from the noise, where they can go to a bar and just have a casual chat with a friend.
Yeah,
because that specific private job was to celebrate someone's birthday, so it wasn't a music show. Music was just part of the entertainment. So I got a lot of things that had to be considered in terms of
was it a live
what
band?
The content is and what the message is.
Was it live band?
Yes. Joburg Big Band.
Okay.
Mango Groove.
Oh, that event. Okay, never mind.
Brucey.
Yeah.
Lyra. That was,
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Memorable event that. Yeah.
Time flies. It's 9:20, guys.
Yeah, it is, eh?
Yeah. I think we've had a great night. I really appreciate it. I think every time we have one of these chats, there's another little topic that sort of tries to jump out from behind the couch.
Yes.
And I think, I'm going to keep going, and I've asked you guys to keep sending in topic suggestions. One that came up the last couple of days, I've been following some Facebook groups, and I'm sure we've all seen it over Easter weekend with churches and streaming and all that. And there's, from a technical perspective, even us getting this stream right, we spent a couple of days to get, and you see our flickering now still, which is annoying me. But there's so many tips and tricks from a technical perspective. I've got Anton van Sale from Waldemar tomorrow, which we're going to just do some do's and don'ts, tips and tricks on getting streaming right and focusing on your audio and all that kind of stuff, which will be a nice chat. And if you guys want to join, I'm going to put an ad up for that just after this. And then and I'm going to use the voice as another example. Again, I might get Adrian in again. Me and him spoke about it offline earlier, the clocking scenario, away from the outcomes, from a technical perspective, purely me running on the broadcast side with Supersport OBs, him and Simon on the inside. We might even bring Simon in here as well as a third head, just to talk about how we interacted, communicated between devices, synced, clocked, Dante, MADI, AES, MIDI, LTC is another big question that came up the other day. From Ableton and all that, and then the talkback system with comms between music director, artists, all that kind of stuff. It's got a very nice, the project itself's got a nice way of leaning it to its specific technical discussion. So that's definitely going to come up soon. So keep looking out for our ads. I want to say thank you to Adrian. I mean, he didn't have to do this. I had to force him. But
thank you.
I really enjoyed it. It's nice having a different perspective and not having to talk for an hour by myself.
It's a bit daunting, I must tell you. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
That's great.
I think it's just another case in point that we each have our own opinions about how to do things, and it's always good to hear someone just share their opinion with you.
Yeah.
We all have opinions. One might be more applicable than the
Yeah,
other one.
the only reason, some of us work is because more people like our opinions than others. But I think we had a good session tonight. I think we're going to cut it off there.
Cool.
I'm going to greet you guys, and then we'll see you guys soon. Just keep looking out for our ads and like our website so you'll get our links. And if there's any other questions that come through, we'll forward them. We'll keep looking at them. We'll see if we can answer them at a later stage. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you.